Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel once again. Today, we are going to look at the case of Kim Wall. As on other occasions, I apologize for the reflection that can be produced by the glasses, but it is that at this time of the night, it is really necessary for me. I have astigmatism, as the doctor told me. This eye sees worse than this one, and when I take them off at this time, I can't take them off because if I do, my eyes can't understand what they're seeing. Like this one doesn't understand that this one sees poorly. It's very funny, but it also gives me a headache if I do that. On the other hand, a detail you might not care about is that my shoulders hurt. My shoulders hurt, and that's why I might be moving around weirdly throughout the video. Because, in case you don't follow me on Instagram, which is totally fine if you don't, no problem, we had a car accident, and these are the consequences. My shoulders hurt. Kim Isabel Frederica Wall was born on March 23, 1987, in Trelleborg, a small Swedish town located in the Scania region, very close to the Swedish border with Denmark. In that community of approximately 30,000 inhabitants, Kim lived with her parents, Ingrid, a finance journalist, and Joaquin Wall, a renowned photographer, as well as her younger brother, Tom, until she finished her secondary studies. After that, she began her university studies abroad. Although it was not an easy thing, no one in her family was surprised that she made this decision. Trelleborg seemed too small for her, and since her childhood, Kim dreamed of living in a big city and having a job that did not match the environment of her birthplace. Her huge dreams matched perfectly with her ambition, but also with her intelligence. She was an outstanding student, and that made it much easier to get into a prestigious university like London School of Economics and Political Sciences, considered one of the best places in the world to study social sciences. With a lot of effort, Kim graduated from there with a degree in international relations, but she was still interested in continuing to study and learn, especially because she had discovered that she didn't want to work in international relations, but as a journalist, which also didn't surprise those who knew her. Kim was a naturally curious person who not only liked to research, but also to interview people to tell their stories in writing. This explains why no one was surprised by the young woman's decision to study journalism. Kim did the acclaimed journalism program at Columbia University, considered the best in England. To finish her tertiary studies, Kim decided to get a master's degree in international affairs, also at Columbia University, where just like in her previous studies, she stood out as one of the brightest students. She officially finished her master's degree in 2015, and although she wanted to continue studying and learning at her 28 years, the young woman understood that she was ready to start working on what she was passionate about, but always under her own rules. Owner of a very charming and vibrant personality, Kim had her values very clear, especially her integrity and that of her work, so she didn't want to have to commit to working with any medium that told her how to act, what to write, or, on the contrary, what not to say or investigate. In 2016, as an independent journalist, Kim published her first reports, and since then, her career took off quite quickly. Without losing her status as an independent journalist, Kim began working for several of the most popular and prestigious media outlets in the world, such as The New York Times, The Guardian, Time Magazine, South China Morning Post, among many others. Her journalistic thirst led her, at 28 years old, to illegally enter North Korea to write about the country. And as if that wasn't enough, she had dared to tour the torture chambers of the dictator of Uganda at that time. Kim was committed to speaking the truth in all the work she did, whether or not the subject matter was more complicated, and that had begun to bear fruit shortly after her first article was published. That same year, in 2016, Kim was awarded the Hensel Meets Prize by a German newspaper for the best digital report for her work Exodus, where she talked about climate change and nuclear tests in the Marshall Islands. It seemed to be the start of a career that was only on the rise. Her name was becoming more and more known for her way of doing journalism, and every day new media outlets were reaching out to work with her, which continued until 2017, the year she turned 30. In addition to success in her professional life, Kim was also very happy with her personal life. For quite some time, she had been in a relationship with a Danish designer named Ole Stav Nielsen, with whom she lived in the capital of Denmark. However, since they both had flexibility in their jobs and wanted to travel the rest of the world, the couple had decided to move to Beijing for a while to get to know Asian culture. Despite everything that an international move entails and how little time was left for it to happen, Kim never stopped working. On the contrary, when the Wired magazine contacted her to work on a report about Peter Madsen, a Danish inventor with a quite extravagant personality, she did not hesitate to accept. And to really understand this case, we have to stop to talk about this person, Peter Madsen, and why recently he had become a kind of Danish celebrity due to this eccentric personality he had. Born in 1971, Peter grew up in Sivi, a Danish city located approximately 100 kilometers from the capital, which is Copenhagen. His mother, Annie, was 36 years younger than his father, Carl. In addition, she had 3 other children prior to her marriage with Peter's father, who supported the family thanks to the restaurant he owned. Family life was far from idyllic. Sources claim Carl acted aggressively towards his stepchildren. While he was a man who believed in hard discipline and strict education with Annie's children, he was directly abusive, and this led to the couple separating when Peter was 6 years old. Fed up with the aggressions, Annie had taken her children and left without looking back. But many sources claim that being under their mother's care was no better for the children. According to these sources, Annie was a controlling woman with whom Peter did not get along especially well despite how strict she was. He got along much better with his father as they both shared common interests, such as World War II, but especially their interest in space and rockets, that led him to decide to go back to live with his father, who had moved to Hong, where he completed all his education. From the moment he returned, Carl encouraged his interest in spacecraft and in understanding how rocket propulsion worked. This curiosity and desire to learn about all the science behind rockets led him to establish a very close relationship with his high school chemistry and physics teacher, Johannes Fischer. With his help, Peter built his first large rocket. It was made of metal and was approximately 1 meter tall. Its design was inspired by an American model. On March 3, 1986, Peter made the launch. His first rocket reached a height of 100 meters before falling, without hurting anyone. The following year, when he finished high school, Peter was accepted into a gymnasium program, a kind of baccalaureate, where the goal is to prepare students for university, giving them slightly more advanced knowledge. Obviously, Peter's had to do with science and physics. To attend it, he had to move to Kalundborg, where he started living in a kind of student house. At 18 years old, his father passed away, so, without a reason to return to Hong, Peter fully settled in Kalundborg, where he began to mingle with engineers and people who, like him, were interested in spacecraft. That's how Peter decided to dedicate himself to his great passion, creating rockets and also submarines, although he never pursued any tertiary education for it. But that was not an obstacle for him to become an inventor and creator. With his charisma as his best tool, in 2008, living in Copenhagen, he founded the company Suborbitals, with which he intended to launch manned rockets, although to be able to do so, he needed to find sponsors, which was not very complicated for him. With the money he had been given, Peter built that same year a submarine which he named UC-3 Nautilus. Both its design and construction had been carried out by him, which of course generated a lot of curiosity about him. During that time, Peter began to grant interviews to the media. It's the largest privately made submarine in the world. She repeated every time she had the chance, and that caused her name to start attracting more and more attention as the eccentric inventor. In the following years, several documentaries were made about him, and a book was even published with his biography. He had slowly become a sort of celebrity that national and international media wanted to talk to in order to hear his somewhat incredible stories. That Kim called him on behalf of The Wired to interview him in 2017 was not something out of the ordinary then. At that time, he was the director of the rocket Madsen space lab, with which Peter continued to seek to launch rockets and nanosatellites into space, for which he had a hangar. By that time, Peter was married and still enjoying his celebrity status. In fact, in October of that same year, a movie about his life was going to be released, so the report from The Wired was extremely justified, and he did not delay in accepting it. Given that context, then, we can move on to the facts. Kim had started working on the interview in the middle of that year. However, by August, she still didn't have a way to wrap it up, with only 6 days left before moving to China, while the journalist and her boyfriend Ol were having a farewell lunch at their home with their friends. Kim received a message from Peter. The inventor, who was aware of the young woman's complications with her article, seemed to have found a way to solve it. He invited her to have tea in the hangar of his laboratory and then go sailing in his submarine UC-3 Nautilus. Writing about the experience of sailing with Peter in the submarine that he himself had built seemed like an excellent way to finish the article she was writing, so she excitedly decided to accept, but not before telling Ol about the proposal, inviting him to go with her. It was a unique opportunity, and Ol was aware of it, but he knew that they couldn't dismiss their guests for a plan that had just come up. So he encouraged his girlfriend to go alone, as long as she told him absolutely all the details, which Kim promised with a smile before getting back in touch with Peter to arrange the details. They agreed to meet at 19 o'clock at the port's pier. The inventor promised it would only take a few hours, stating they would be back around 10 o'clock at night. Responsible as always, and also extremely excited about what she was about to experience, Kim left home past 18 o'clock, arriving at the hangar at 18:40, so she had to wait for Peter about 20 minutes. The inventor arrived on time. He was wearing his usual jumpsuit and that charismatic smile that characterized him. The journalist, for her part, was wearing an orange jacket over a black and white skirt. Her hair was tied up in a bun. Very neat. Although they had agreed to have tea, the journalist's eagerness to dive led the inventor to guide her directly to the submarine, which was documented in the photos she sent to her boyfriend. Remember that she had promised to tell him absolutely all the details. The first was a photo of the ship. Just a few seconds later, another photo followed of some windmills in the water, and finally, a third of her at the helm of the submarine. The apartment that Ol and Kim shared was quite close to the port, so upon seeing the photos, the designer left the grill in charge of one of his friends and went to his yard to look towards there. Surprisingly, he could see how the submarine was on the surface of the sea. For a good while, the inventor and the journalist sailed on the surface. They even came across a boat carrying a father and sons from Norway. Kim didn't talk to them, but she did take several photos while Peter was talking to these people and even joking around. After several minutes, around 20 to 30, and after saying goodbye, Peter decided it was time to dive, so he led his guest down the ladder of the conduit and closed the lock to start the descent. Just before fully submerging, Kim sent a message to her boyfriend. "I'm alive, by the way. We're about to descend now. I love you." She said this with a certain humor. A few seconds later, she added, "Peter brought coffee and cookies." None of the messages were necessarily intriguing. It didn't seem like Kim was in danger or even felt uncomfortable with the situation. However, those would be the last messages that Ol would receive from his girlfriend. None of the messages he tried to send afterwards got through. At first, the designer tried not to worry too much. Perhaps Kim had lost track of time under the sea, or was very focused on her work, so he focused on his friends. After all, his girlfriend had told him she would be back around 10 at night. However, that didn't happen. At 10:30, Ole still hadn't heard anything from Kim. Nervous, he decided to go look for his girlfriend at the port. If they had gotten lost in the depth of the sea, maybe he could see them resurface. But after being there for a few minutes and not seeing anything, he decided to head directly to Madsen's company hangar. There, he didn't find the inventor or his girlfriend, but he did find Peter's wife, a woman he had married in 2011. This woman, whose identity was never revealed, said she was there looking for her husband, who she said never went sailing with anyone else. And while this was true, the woman omitted to tell him that she had received a message from Peter at 23 and 25. "I'm on a little adventure on the Nautilus. Everything is fine, sailing on a calm sea and under the moonlight. It's not submerged. Kisses and hugs to the cats." Why didn't Peter's wife share this information with Ole? We don't know. But, worried, the young man decided to go home to wait there for his girlfriend, who also didn't show up in the following hours. Increasingly scared, at 1:45 in the morning on August 11th, the designer decided to call the police to report Kim's disappearance. Half an hour later, he also called the Navy to file the same report. The Coast Guard didn't delay in taking action, sending messages to Madsen's submarine, but these were never answered. Somewhat worried, they began to look for any sign of the submarine, which they only found at 3:30 in the morning when they received an alarm of a possible maritime accident. The Navy was already near the area searching for the submarine when a merchant ship communicated to report that it had almost been hit by a vessel without reflectors. It was the UC-3. Faced with new attempts at communication by the Navy, Peter decided to answer in a very brief and concise manner. They were going to return due to technical problems. However, the submarine never returned. The Navy and the Coast Guard waited until 10:30 in the morning on August 11th for it to appear. When it didn't, both the Danish and Swedish police decided to start searching themselves in the Koga Strait, where they finally managed to see it. They quickly communicated it to the Navy. Madsen responded to them, "We are coming back." While the Navy was sending a vessel to where the submarine was, however, they didn't arrive. Around 11 in the morning, before the Navy's vessel reached the submarine, the Nautilus sank. The inventor managed to get to the surface and throw himself into the sea, where he was rescued and taken to the port of Dragor. The news of the submarine's sinking quickly reached the press, who were waiting for Madsen at the door of the hospital to which he was being transferred. Before receiving medical attention, Peter stopped to talk to the journalists, saying he was very sad about the sinking of his submarine, but he did not mention Kim at all, something that both Ole and the authorities found unusual. After confirming that his health was good, Madsen was taken to give a statement that same night at a police station to talk about what had happened. In this first statement, Peter claimed to have been alone in the submarine when it sank. He said that at 10:30 the previous night, he had left the journalist at the port near a restaurant called Halvandet. The police quickly contacted the owner of the establishment, Bob Peterson, who made available the surveillance cameras that were in the area of the restaurant. Upon analyzing the images, the police quite simply proved that Peter's story was a lie. Kim did not appear in any of the images. In addition, before the sinking, he had always spoken to the Navy in plural, as if he was with another person if he was supposedly alone in the submarine. When confronted with this evidence, Peter Madsen changed his story a lot. He said that Kim had died inside the submarine accidentally. A 70-kilogram hatch had fallen on her head. This second account seemed quite suspicious to the police because Peter's attitude also made no sense. If it had been an accident, why hadn't he asked for help or lied in the first place? What corroborated their suspicions was the report made by Navy experts. These experts had come to the conclusion that the submarine had not sunk accidentally, but had been intentional. This information led to the creation of an operation to recover the pieces of this ship. When they pulled it out of the water, they realized that the place was full of blood, but Kim's body was nowhere to be found. Until they confirmed that the blood belonged to her, the police did not confront Madsen again. But when the results came back, confirming the suspicion, the police called him again. In this interrogation, he changed his story again, starting to talk about having buried her at sea. However, after this statement, he did not speak again. A few days later, on August 21st, a cyclist from Amager, an island near Copenhagen, found a dismembered torso on the shore of one of the beaches during one of his rides. Even before conducting the analyses, the police were convinced they had found part of Kim, and unfortunately, they were right. The female torso without its limbs or head belonged to the journalist. Peter was placed under preventive arrest, while the focus shifted to recovering the rest of the woman's body, for which a search operation had to be organized with the help of the Navy and involved a good number of experienced divers. The search area was very large, and the findings were gradually made in different places. It took several weeks. Kim's head, legs, arms, and clothes were found under the sea, stored in garbage bags and boxes. Clearly, there's nothing accidental about that. With Kim's body now in their possession, the police re-interrogated Peter in October, an interrogation in which Madsen changed his story again. He said that the journalist had died after getting trapped in the engine room. According to him, she had been poisoned by carbon monoxide, but that clearly did not explain the amount of blood in the submarine. The results of the autopsy performed on the body also did not match. Forensic scientists couldn't determine the young woman's cause of death. The advanced state of decomposition made it impossible to determine the cause. It seemed unlikely that she had died due to carbon monoxide poisoning, as there were no typical signs of this type of poisoning in Kim, such as third-degree burns. The autopsy had detailed how cuts had been found on the torso at the level of the abdomen that least coincided with the story of poisoning, but Peter said he had an explanation for this. He said he had made them to extract the oxygen from his companion's body after he passed away. However, as you can probably imagine, this was also a lie. The forensic team led by Christina Jacobson was able to prove that the cuts had been made while there was still blood circulation in the body. That is, while Kim was still alive. In fact, the forensic team counted a total of 40 cuts and several stabbings. All of this had been done under the same conditions. That is, while the journalist was alive, which means she had been murdered. No longer able to keep making things up, Peter was forced to confess the torture he had subjected Kim to, and also that he had dismembered her in what he defined as a horrible and irrational moment after having ended her life. The worst part was that he had not only done all of that, but after having dismembered her, he had tied each part of her body with different metals so that it wouldn't float to the surface. As for the torso, he had tried another method. He inserted some sort of tubes into the lungs to remove the oxygen so it wouldn't float, although this clearly didn't work. Kim's body, or what was left of it, showed the macabre nature of her last hours of life. She had damage practically everywhere, but the inventors seemed to have specifically targeted her genital area, where he had made 14 cuts. With all this new information, it was time to start reconstructing the events, a task that was not necessarily simple. It took her several weeks of investigation, during which they also raided the inventor's house, finding evidence of a man who seemed to be deeply disturbed. On the hard drive of a computer in his house, they found more than 40 real videos of women being tortured in front of cameras. Among the most macabre videos, there were images of women being impaled, burned, and a whole lot of completely horrible things. On another hard drive, they found stored 100 links that led to videos like the ones on the other computer. The hypothesis that Peter Madsen had acted premeditatedly to fulfill his darkest fantasies began to gain more weight for the police, who also decided to interrogate the inventor's environment. Surprisingly, Peter's fetishes were not something unknown to his friends. Camilla Ledegaard, one of this man's closest friends, said that he frequently attended fetish sex parties. His co-workers added that he liked to call himself the sadist, something that he evidently was. Finally, with the evidence collected, the police reconstructed the events in the following way. According to them, as soon as Peter and Kim were inside the submarine, the inventor tied the young woman to some pipes or tubes inside the ship, which explained the tie marks that had been found burned on the girl's wrists. Given the type of friction burns, the police assumed that he had immobilized her with ropes, and possibly Kim's own stockings, whom he abused repeatedly before strangling her until she lost consciousness. But the police believed that wasn't the end of it. They were convinced that Peter had also tortured and impaled her alive before Kim, unable to bear so much pain, lost her life. It was impossible to determine the specific cause of the journalist's heart stopping, but there was no doubt that Madsen was the reason for her death. Prosecutor Jacob Butch Jepson was responsible for directing the final stages of the investigation and preparing the case against the inventor. The prosecutor's intention from the moment he was assigned the case was to get Madsen sentenced to life in prison. Butch was convinced that Kim was not Peter's first victim, and therefore made sure to analyze different unsolved cases to confirm his suspicions. The one that caught his attention the most was that of a 22-year-old Japanese tourist named Kazuko Toyonaga, who had disappeared in the same city. But when Peter was 15 years old, that is, in 1986, just like in Kim's case, this girl was found dismembered with wounds similar to those of the journalist. Despite the suspicions of the prosecutor and investigators, there was no evidence that could connect the two cases, so they set aside the murder of Kazuko and focused on building a strong case against Peter to take him to court. The trial began on March 8, 2018, and, as expected, was closely followed not only by Danish media, but also by international ones. In fact, more than 15 countries from around the world sent journalists to cover the trial, in which Madsen continued to plead innocent. Prosecutor Butch argued that Peter had meticulously planned the crime, bringing torture tools that he later used to harm Kim. Nothing that happened that night was an accident, but a plan to fulfill one of his darkest fantasies. Despite not openly admitting to ending the journalist's life, Peter Madsen admitted to sleeping a few hours inside the submarine with the girl's lifeless body, and after his nap, he dismembered it. He calmly said, "First I tried with an arm and it was relatively quick. It was all very quick, and I got her out of the submarine." The prosecutor's claim about the inventor was easily believed by all. Peter really seemed to be a very cold man, with no kind of remorse or guilt for what he had done. Throughout the trial, he only seemed to show emotion when Prosecutor Butch directly confronted him about the amount of morbid videos he watched. Without a logical answer to give, the inventor got angry. During the 12 days the trial lasted, the jury had to see all the terrible evidence and pay close attention to each piece. In the legal process, it was also determined that Peter had tried to take 3 other women to the submarine before Kim, but for one reason or another, they all ended up rejecting this offer. Although the court hearings had ended much earlier, the trial officially ended on April 25th, when his sentence was announced. He was found guilty of the 3 charges he was facing: premeditated murder, indecent handling of a body, and sexual abuse. Due to the severity of his crimes and the coldness with which he had committed them, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, although this does not mean that he will spend his entire life in jail. Prior to the announcement of the sentence, his wife filed for divorce. But this did not affect Madsen too much, who ended up having a romantic relationship with a 40-year-old woman who worked in the jail. When this relationship became known, the woman, who was a single mother, ended up being fired from her job. But Peter managed to continue winning over. In fact, at the end of 2019, he remarried a Russian activist named Jenny Korpin, who had come to Denmark as a political refugee. However, their marriage, because yes, they did get married, didn't last too long, as they filed for divorce in January of 2022. This man continues to be a kind of personality in Denmark, but no longer for his inventions, but for the macabre nature of his crime. And so we come to the end of the video. This case was requested a lot over the years. I have no idea why I ignored this request, maybe because of its cruelty and how detailed it is, but anyway, here it is.